name is KJ, and you're listening to the Supernatural Opinions podcast, where some things in this world are supernatural. My pronouns are she, they, and this is the podcast where I talk to my fellow Supernatural fans about Supernatural, and we share our supernatural opinions.
Hey, it's Ed and KJ. We're over 100 days into the WGA SAG-AFTRA strike, and it still hasn't been resolved. So I am back with some more strike bonus content. And I'm the host of Supernatural Opinions, the co-host of Series Opinions, and Wayward Parents, and some pending new projects that I can't quite talk about for the same reason that we're doing these bonuses. But I truly just wanted to thank you all for your patience during this time. Obviously, it's not as bad for me. I have a full-time job that I'm still going to, as it is for these people who already weren't being paid and now aren't getting paid because they have to be striking instead of working. So what are we doing today? Today, I'm here to talk about the things that you should think about before you start a podcast, because I truly believe that anyone who wants to start a podcast can and should. It's a relatively low barrier to entry, and there's so much potential to find a community, but it is more work than I think a lot of people imagine. And there is more things to think about. I think you can absolutely go into making a podcast with no research and just wing it and see what we do. I mean, honestly, that's basically what I've done. But, I've learned from the mistakes I made, and I thought that I would share the things that you should definitely think about before you get started. You don't need to have a super researched answer and a PowerPoint to answer all of these, but you should definitely think about them. First thing is have an idea, which I can't help you with. Whatever you think that you want to talk about, if there's something that you know a lot about or you want to know a lot about, there's a lot of people on this planet, someone else probably also wants to know those things and would love to hear you talk about them. And even if they don't, as long as you're not planning on making this a career, if this is just a fun passion project for you, talk about whatever you want. Even if no one else listens, do it for yourself. I've been really lucky that the things that I enjoy doing and creating for myself are also things that other people want to listen to. And I feel like for most cases, that's going to be the case. Once you have that idea, you're going to need a name, a logo, and possibly some theme music. I've been super lucky. I've had friends who are artists. Faith, one of my co-hosts on Series of Opinions, create our logo for that show and for this show, and Elena created our logo for Wayward Parents. If you think that someone else has already done what you want to do, don't be discouraged from doing it. The Pod Squad literally exists because August, Beth, Jamie, and I all started our shows within a month of each other, and August and Beth and Jamie all had the same name before Saving People Queering Things, rebranded from, they were both Driver Picks the Podcast before that. So if the idea you have is as saturated as this fandom is, don't panic, don't feel discouraged or feel I don't have anything to add, because I definitely do advise looking for a niche or offering something uniquely yours that will set you apart, and definitely avoid any same name situations, because the branding is a nightmare and the podcast stats will be inaccurate and confused. But people are all different. So even though there's over 20 podcasts in this fandom space, we're all doing okay, and we all share our resources and expertise and advice and our mutual love where we can. When you're thinking of a name, think about what the initialism is going to be, think about the social media handles you're going to have, the hashtags. Absolutely, please do a Google search and make sure that not only is the name not already taken, but it doesn't have some obscure political affiliation in your country or any neighboring countries or niche internet spaces. Just go a few pages in and make sure. Possibly go ahead and reserve the handles on whatever media apps you fled to after Tumblr tried to wipe pornography, or Elon Musk bought Twitter, which I'm dead naming out of spite, and to emphasize the waste power of branding that's just occurred before our very eyes. Because your name is going to be what people are searching for. It's how people are going to find you. So don't just go with your gut instinct. I picked Supernatural Opinions because I wanted to match Series of Opinions, which was a name that we thought very long and very hard about. But now that, Series of Opinions has been basically on a permanent hiatus, and Supernatural Opinions is my main podcasting priority, I do wish I hadn't had a little bit more fun with it. So, think about that. Think about how circumstances might change. I didn't really plan for it to be a complete 180 of my podcasting priorities the way that it ended up being, but life happens. Things happen. We started this podcast without a theme song. One of our guests in season 1, Julia, her dad, Joe Ferretta, wrote the theme song that we have now as a 4-minute song and just sent me the audio file with blanket permission to cut it however I wanted. I purchased the music for Series of Opinions off a website, and Beth created our theme and August created our clown circus outro from open source royalty-free materials for Wayward Parents. I recommend not using any licensed music in your show, especially for the themes, unless absolutely vital for some reason, especially if your content centers around on any licensed media that you haven't licensed yourself, which I'm imagining is expensive. If you're licensing the music from like a show that you want to talk about, you're probably contracted by the show to make that content, or you should be in order to afford that, honestly. When we did the general media on Series of Opinions, I would occasionally add in clips from whatever media we were talking about. This is typically fine under fair use, but I kept those clips very short. I used them very sparingly, and I picked which ones to add on a case-by-case basis. I evaluated where the clip was from, how long it was, what's the worst case scenario if somebody is upset that I've used this content. And on Supernatural Opinions, I don't use any clips from the show at all. I just feel more comfortable reading the transcripts. I might not deliver the transcript lines as beautiful as Jensen, Jared, Misha, or Jim, but for now, that's where I'm at, just comfort-wise. I'm not here to tangle with the studio or the network. Not today. If you want to talk about, something that's owned by a particular studio that's, very well known for, that's very known for suing people who use their content, better just steer clear. You probably want at least one friend to commit to helping you. My biggest mistake on Supernatural Opinions was thinking I could do everything for the show by myself for 8 years. Burnout hit me so hard. We're still looking for anyone interested in being our editor. No experience necessary, not even kidding. We have some potential help coming in from the last bonus episode I put out, but if you're at all interested in even just learning, if you want to come and edit for a little while just to learn my editing process and what I've learned, I'd be happy to teach you, before you, decide if you want to do this for yourself, or, if you're coming out of a podcast project and you don't know what you're doing next, I could use the help, because you're going to want to split up everything into different tasks. It doesn't need to be a 50-50 or an even split. You're just going to want to play to your partner's strong suit. So on Series of Opinions, Faith was our Instagram queen. She ran Facebook and Instagram for us. The very talented artist she literally went to school to be. And we split all of the prep work very evenly, and Moya and I split the other social medias, and we also split editing depending on who had the most stuff going on that particular week. We were both in university at the time, so if I had a test this week, then Moya was editing, and if Moya had a test next week, then I was going to edit, and that's how we kind of ran things over there. Meredith loves to do the research in the mythology, so I just don't even touch that. That is completely her baby, and I handle other stuff. There are a ton of resources for starting podcasts, but here's my recommendations. You should start with a free editing software. Audacity is super popular. I was able to teach myself how to use it pretty easily. It does need to be saved frequently. It's a destructive editor, so if something does go wrong while editing, it might be hard to correct it. You might have to start over. Definitely have a clean version that you haven't touched saved separately. There are other free options out there that aren't destructive. I just don't want to recommend any of them that I haven't used. I don't want to recommend a paid software unless you're really sure you're enjoying the process. I would maybe consider moving to a paid software, because I've, this is my second podcast. I'm 3 seasons into a 15-season commitment, but honestly, I'm doing really well with my free one. So I just don't recommend paying for one unless you're sure that you're going to enjoy the podcasting process. There's no point in paying for something that you're not going to use. If you've planned for big blocks of yourself talking, like I have in this particular episode, I really like to use wordstotime.com just to see if something needs to be broken up. I have a pretty short attention span myself, so I want to keep things moving, or at least throw in a joke or change things up after a few minutes. And on Series of Opinions, we wouldn't share our prep work between the three of us. We might say a general overview of what we were going to talk about, but we wouldn't share that. So I would often, put my prep into wordstotime.com and just see about how long I thought it was going to take me to get through that amount of content. And if it was 5 minutes, then maybe I add a bit more. And if it was 30 minutes, then I know that I need to cut that down so that Faith and Moya have an equal amount of time to talk about their stuff that they've prepped. So it's really, just a really helpful resource to have. And it just also could just be oh, you need to throw in a joke. You haven't thrown in a joke for a few minutes, or you need to change up what you're doing. I definitely recommend recording, editing, and getting feedback on at least a couple of episodes before you start putting them out. Honestly, in my opinion, ideally, you have a 6-episode buffer. So you're recording at least 6 episodes in advance. Ideally, you're editing 6 episodes in advance. I'm editing 0 episodes in advance at all times, and it is not good. But I'm recording much more than 6 in advance. So we're like several months ahead on recording. But yeah, make some complete episodes, put them out to your trusted friends and family, see what they think, get that feedback, make some changes before you start putting out episodes. Just get that little feedback stage. There are a ton of podcast hosting sites. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, some of them have both options. I did a lot of research before picking one, but what's right for me might not be right for you. I'm going to tell you about the ones that I've used before. My regular hosting platform for Series of Opinions and Supernatural Opinions is Spreaker from iHeartRadio. I'm using one of the paid tiers. On Wayward Parents, we used Anchor, which I believe has since rebranded to Spotify for podcasters. And aside from a little bit of a lag when using Anchor, when we were uploading some of those lengthier Wayward Parents episodes, I found it really easy to use. I found both of them pretty easy to use. If you don't know why you should be using a hosting website, if you happen to have a podcast that just takes an audience by storm, or you don't know how to build a website, your website probably can't handle the traffic of like 50,000 downloads per episode. We've never hit anywhere close to that. We've never hit 50,000 downloads overall. We've barely hit 5,000 downloads overall, but there are definitely podcasts out there and podcasts in this fandom space that have that kind of traffic. Your website can't handle that. Also, these hosting sites distribute your content to all the big apps: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, CastBox, Overcast, Stitcher, RIP, with pretty minimal setup. You set up each app once in both of those sites, and the content is then sent to them every time you put an episode up. So you're not adding to each of those individually. You click upload and it goes to all of them. It just makes your life so much easier. After you've done all that, you're really just executing your vision. Create the content consistently, not my strong suit, I know, and figuring out what format works for you or what bits segments are forming. And don't be afraid to change things up that are more work than you expected or not as funny as you expected, or lean into something that comes up organically. Like for us, we didn't used to have the Call CBS segment, and now a lot of people tell us that that's their favorite segment. Or I thought that Team Case and Team No Case were going to be a big thing, and they were a thing that I really tried to make happen in season 1 and season 2, and they just didn't happen. So I don't try and do that unless it's really obvious for the particular episode. I don't think anyone else even knew that was a bit except for me. So just don't be afraid to let that happen really organically. Your audience will hopefully tell you what they like, and they'll definitely tell you if they don't like something you're doing. But don't take any of the negative reactions to heart. I could be the only person listening to my show, and I would still keep making it because I'm making the content that I like. But if somebody doesn't like it, then I just think that they should move on, especially because they have so many other options in this fandom space. I just think, oh, well, I'm not for them, but hopefully they'll find someone that is. If you're not sure what you want to talk about just yet, or you're waffling between a couple of ideas, or like me, twice a week you think or say to your poor bleared best friend, I could make a podcast about this. Here is my advice for narrowing things down. Either don't narrow things down, have a very general media approach like I did on Series of Opinions, or don't pick projects that are multi-year commitments. I love making Supernatural Opinions. I think I'll always love the show. I've built myself a community that extends through the show itself, my content, the podcast, the friendships I've made. My experience of making the podcast and watching the show is not like any other show I've ever consumed. So even if I don't think it's the best show ever all of the time, or if people have finally recovered from their brain rot in 2029 and have stopped listening, I think I'll still have things that I want to talk about. But there is definitely a part of me that is aware that I could make a bunch of shorter podcasts about other things that I also want to share knowledge about that I can't, because I've committed to talking about this show that is 15 seasons long, plus our discussions, plus every week that we take off, not just waiting for the studio to pay its people, but weeks that I've taken off for holidays, or because I was burnt out, or because I was traveling, or whatever other reasons, adds to the time I'm committing to this podcast, which is looking like 2028, 2029 at this point. The final thing that I wish I'd considered before I ever got started was guests. I always knew that I wanted Supernatural Opinions to be guest-based. I wanted it to be a show about Supernatural for fans, by fans. I wanted the fans to have a big influence on what was talked about. I wanted fans involved in every step of the process. There are lots of podcasts where one person has seen the show, one person hasn't, or two people watching together in some way, especially when the show was still airing. And I listened to all of those podcasts, and they're really great. I knew that there were already a lot of people who had seen the show who, they didn't want to commit to the 400 episodes I have planned, but they had 1 or 2 episodes that they were very, very knowledgeable about, and they were very qualified to speak about. And if you already have a following, especially in the area you want to make more content and you're ahead of the game on this, I didn't really have that. So what I did was, in the months that I was in planning for the podcast, which was about 6 months that I spent, planning out how I was going to do all of this, I jumped on TikTok. I started cranking out content, getting the word out that I was planning on making the show. I met a few people, they introduced me to other people, or they shared my content, or they liked my content. The algorithms did their thing and spread my message. I was involved in a very minor 2-day Twitter brawl over a fictional character's sexuality, and then bing, bang, boom. There were guests that were interested in talking to me, and for the record, I do not recommend a Twitter fight, literally ever. I had a not insignificant dip in mental health in the weeks following. Absolutely not worth gaining like 50 followers that I could have gained by saying something like insightful about the show. Especially if Mr. Musk goes through with removing the ability to block people. Like, just avoid a fight if you can. I didn't vet my guests super carefully, and not carefully enough for the first few seasons. Basically, anyone that wanted to be on the show got on the show and got whatever episode they wanted. There was no competition for it, and that's still true for the most part. If you want to be on the show, you're going to get on the show. I don't guarantee absolutely whatever episode you want. Obviously, there are some episodes that everybody wants, and I can't have everybody, but there are definitely guests that I have had on that I wish I hadn't had on for that episode, and there's guests that I haven't had on that I wish I had followed through on having them on. And the main reason for both of those regrets, because those are honestly the same, two sides to the same coin. The main reason for both those was not the guests themselves, it was the quantity of guests that we have had on the show. My original plan was for myself and Meredith and 2 guests each episode. And we did that through the first 3 seasons, which is what you've been hearing up to now. We're about a third of the way through season 4 recordings, and with the exception of people who sign up as a pair to be guests, we've only been having 1 guest besides Meredith and myself, and Meredith hasn't been joining every episode like she was on the first 3 seasons. That's not to say we won't be having 4 guests. You know, obviously the really popular episodes, I'm not going to say, oh, we only have 1 guest on Lazarus Rising. I'm not going to take Lazarus Rising from as many people as possible, and I'm also not going to split up natural pairings. Like, if JB wants to come on and do an episode, I'm not going to say, oh, Beth, you can't come on because we've only been having 1 guest this season. I'm not going to split up a dream team like that. If people have signed up as a pair, I'm going to put both of them on at the same time. But having less guests has allowed the guests that we've had on the ability to talk a lot more, which is what we want. We want to hear those opinions. It also makes the editing and the scheduling a lot easier. If you're planning to have guests on your podcast regularly, scheduling is difficult. Like, just take that into account. I work a 9 to 5, so my evenings and my weekends are typically free to record. Meredith works a varied schedule that changes every week, and she has family obligations in her off time, and the same is true for a lot of our guests. You know, they have other things going on in their lives besides this podcast, and finding a time that works for 3 people versus a time that works for 4 people, 3 people is a lot easier. It's a lot easier for Meredith and I to go, okay, we're both free on one particular afternoon. Are you also free on this afternoon? And if the answer is yes, then that's easy scheduling. If the answer is no, then, you know, that's a little bit better, but at least we're just working with one person's schedule instead of 2. And those are the things that I think are the most important things to think through before you get started. So I'm going to sign off for this episode, and let me know what part of the podcast process you want to hear more about if we're still here in 2 weeks. Otherwise, my plan is going to be to talk about my editing process. I feel like my editing process isn't going to be the same as some other people's, and maybe it's not as efficient as it could be. Maybe I am a little bit more particular about some things than other people are, but I'm going to go through what I've been doing, what works for me, and if there's something else that other people want to hear about, then I will talk about that as well, or I will, you know, add that to the list, or I might bump editing. Just let me know what you guys want to hear, and hopefully, you know, we don't have to even hear any of it, because in 2 weeks we'll be back to work. But in the meantime, I've been KJ.
I've been KJ, and this has been Supernatural Opinions. If you enjoyed our show, the best thing you can do is subscribe on your podcast app of choice and tell a friend. Check out our link tree in the episode description for all of our social media and any other Supernatural-related projects we might be working on. Send us an email. Our address is supernaturalopinionspodcast@gmail.com, or reach out directly at KJ, @EditingKJ on all platforms. Thank you to Joe Veretta for our theme song, and our logo was created by Faith Ebert of faithanddesigns.ca. The episode was recorded, edited, and produced by me, Editing KJ. If you want to hear more from me, you can check out my other podcast, Series of Opinions. And last but not least, a huge thank you to all of our guests.